mysteriously disappeared after he was last seen alive on the night he had made a statement in the Kilda Road police station. Until now,
Yo, nah, the Australian OG's getting rid of the witnesses. All right, they getting rid of the witnesses. Okay, now that's a different type of you know what I mean? Because back in the day, that's how it was. Now the witnesses be on all type of podcasts and all type of shit.
he had never been
Oh, shout out to the lads. Yo, lad, you clicked the title, you read the page, so I'm gonna just get to the point. Hold on, let me turn me up. First and foremost, why nobody told me about this Melbourne? Did I say it right? Because sometimes it's Melbourne, sometimes it's Melbourne, depending on who you accent. So since I'm American, why nobody told me about this Melbourne gangland killing shooting thing? Like, I mean, why nobody told me about this whole Melbourne giving it up crazy gangland killing? Like, what's up with this? Listen, there's a disclaimer on this. Let me just read this real quick. This video is meant for educational purposes only, and that's a fact. We're only reacting to it because you know TT loves her history and she is a sucker for Aussie history, all right? Our intention is not to glorify or condone any acts of violence. That's facts. We ain't doing none of that. None of that nature. We're just learning and taking all the Australian history in, all right? All of the information we use is public information from the internet, coming from law enforcement authorities and or news sources. All right, subscribe for the vibe. Let's get to it, man. I done ran out of breath.
But the ganglands are in turmoil. Without trust, there is only war.
No, I don't know who shot me.
Well, you have your eyes shut at the time, or what?
Yeah, well, I've got no idea really who shot me. It's, you know.
Within 4 years, both Jason and Mark would fall to assassins' bullets.
The Melbourne Gangland War has the potential to stand among the most gruesome, drama-filled killings in modern history. It had everything from celebrity drug lords to corrupt police officers. At some point, some politicians even thought it was impossible to stop. We're talking about friends and family members turning against each other, car bombings, broad daylight assassinations.
Yo, what? What? And then you know the shit that breaks my heart with this is like, where does it all come from? Women, money, as if it's not enough women and money and drugs to go around.
And bodies missing, even to this day. The streets weren't safe, nor were police witness protection programs or even maximum security prisons. Yet somehow, all this chaos revolved around one man, Carl Williams, also known as the Smiling Assassin, Premier, and Fat Boy by the police. Carl Williams wasn't your stereotypical hard-faced gangster. Babyface and likable best suited his profile. Often seen wearing denim jeans with plain shirts, Carl could have easily passed for a trainee burger flipper at McDonald's. He always smiled for the cameras and had a personality.
No, that's just like American Gangster. You heard? You ever seen that movie American Gangster? You heard? Drop a comment. That's how he was. You know what I mean? Frank was real laid back. He ain't do all of the flashy stuff, and he was like that. Damn, why nobody ever told me about Carl Williams, lads? Y'all messed up, lads.
That only ripened with his exploits. It's important to note that even though the killings lasted more than a decade, claiming 37 lives, more than 10 were allegedly by his hands. Interestingly, and contrary to most people's assumption, the Melbourne Gangland War initially had nothing to do with Carl. It's accurate to say he stole the show. Therefore, to better understand everything, we'll take it from the top, way back in the 1950s, just after the Second World War, when the Painters and Dockers Union was established on Melbourne's waterfront. Although intended for good, it wasn't long before corruption infiltrated the union. By the 1960s, it had a mafia structure with heroin and cocaine as the primary commodities of trade. Thanks to its ideal proximity to the docks,
Damn, the lad's been trapping since the 60s.
Melbourne's market took to drugs as fish to water. Drugs were incredibly profitable, and it didn't take much to convince your average union worker to take up the side business. By the 1990s, the city was a local amphetamine producer. It was so bad that the police described Melbourne as the amphetamine capital of Australia. Indeed, things were horrible, but at least there was some stability in the underworld. The Moran family headed the Painters and Dockers Union as factions, such as the Carlton Crew and the Honoured Society, dabbled in the drug trade and controlled other branches, such as Melbourne's fruit and vegetable market. However, in 1996, John Higgs' arrest would spark a wildfire like none other. You see, he wasn't your average
Yo, you see how these OGs be moving? Yo, they be having their hands in all sorts of shit. Fruit market, vegetable market.
street-level drug criminal. Instead, he was Australia's #1 amphetamine trafficker, with allies both in the underworld and Australia's elite, including the police force. Higgs' arrest took several years in what is still considered Australia's most expensive criminal investigation. The public celebrated his downfall, but little did they know of the chaos that was about to unfold. Down in the underworld, young aspiring criminals couldn't help but covet the throne. They wanted in on that amphetamine money and were convinced the old mafioso generation had to go. It didn't take long. 2 years later, on January 16, 1998, Alphonse Gangitano was found dead in his home, wearing only underwear. Gangitano, also known as Melbourne's Black Prince of Lygon Street, was the face
Yo, this shit sound like some video game shit. Like, this is crazy.
and leader of the Carlton crew. Since he was a toddler, Gangitano only wanted to be a criminal and was very proud and vocal about his founding of the criminal organization with a close friend, Dominic Mick Gatto. Police reports on his death strongly implicated young Jason Moran, and Kinebra were responsible. DNA
Hey, cut it out. Stop. You're making too much noise. The lads can't hear me. I'm telling you, this dog bugging out.
findings proved that both were present when the murder took place. Surprisingly, they were excused from giving evidence on the grounds that they might incriminate themselves. Gangitano's murder saw the Morans take over the Carlton crew, with many leaders seeking refuge in other criminal organizations. One such leader
Yo, you know you the real boss when you walk around with the suit. You can tell who the workers and who the boss, you know what I mean? Even in the street life, the OGs, the big homies, they walk around with the suits, and I mean back in the day. Now you can't even tell because the OGs walking around like the little homies.
was Mick Gatto, who desperately sought a partner to ally with against the Morans. That same year would see 2 more murders, including a car bombing assassination in August and Mad Charlie's fatal shooting later in November. Charlie, who once bit off a rival's nose, was a major player in Melbourne's amphetamine industry. The following year, the city police had their hands full as they dealt with 8 more murders, including one unfortunate case of mistaken identity. Among them was the assassin
I'm still stuck on he bit someone's nose off. How? How? I mean, Mike Tyson is an American boxer. He bit off a piece of an ear. A piece of the ear. How do you bite off someone's whole nose?
assassination of a criminal's wife, Vicky Jacobs. Her death came shortly after she testified against her husband, Gerald David Prestons, who was implicated in several other murders. Gerald was among the many gangsters that profited off Melbourne's criminal.
Hold up. In America, a wife can't testify against the husband. So in Australia, you can do that? That's not fair because you tell your wife everything. That's not fair. Your wife is like your therapist. Drop a comment.
Links. On September 9th that same year, 38-year-old Brighton underworld businessman Dimitrios Bellis died of a single clean shot to the back of his head. The authorities later reported that his death was related to debt. Allegedly, just days before his death, Bellis desperately tried to clear his debt using fake diamonds. The police even tried to capture the perpetrators by offering $100,000 to anyone with eye-opening information. It so happened that Milorad, Bellis's close friend and business associate, mysteriously disappeared after he was last seen alive on the night he had made a statement in the Kilda Road police station. Until now, he
Yo, nah, the Australian OG's getting rid of the witnesses. Alright? They getting rid of the witnesses. Okay, now that's now that's a different type of you know what I mean? Because back in the day, that's how it was. Now the witnesses be on all type of podcasts and all type of shit.
he had never been found. Police later concluded that he was probably taken
It's actually just kind of weird how everything just took a turn. Thoughts and prayers.
out by the same people that got Bellis. A month later, on October 13th, witnesses would report gunshots at Gladstone Park. Upon arrival, the police found the then 29-year-old Carl Williams bleeding with bullet wounds in his stomach. He survived the ordeal but told the authorities he couldn't identify the shooter. With raised eyebrows, investigators strongly believed one of the Morans shot Carl Williams on his birthday. After all, they knew for sure Carl met with Mark and Jason Moran that day. They also believed that a failed amphetamine batch and ownership of a pill press triggered the dispute. A woman within the vicinity also testified that she heard a man cry, "No, Jason," just moments before shots were fired. Until now, Carl Williams was nothing more than a foot soldier for the Moran crime family. However, sources claim that as his bosses, Mark and Jason Moran, were more preoccupied with the power struggle, he devised a means to undercut them. Using their labs to mix and produce his own batches, he diluted amphetamine with ketamine and sold more at the same price. Gang experts believed his bosses probably found out, and killing him would not bring in any lost money. So instead, they chose to give him a lesson with a near-death experience and demand that he pay them 80,000 Australian dollars for the losses incurred. Carl Williams swore to enact his revenge. However, unfortunately for him, his plans had to wait because on 25th November, he and his father, George Williams, were charged with multiple drug offenses. This came after the police allegedly raided an amphetamine industry in Broadmeadows, seizing around 25,000 amphetamine tablets,
Yeah, I never heard of Broadmeadows. What's that, lad? What happens over there?
a pill press, and a firearm. All of this was estimated to have a street value of around 20 million Australian dollars. However,
They getting money over there in Broadmeadows.
they were not brought to trial because of corruption allegations against former drug squad detectives involved in the raid. The two Williams were eventually released. In the year 2000, the string of murders would continue. The first to fall would be the one-time godfather of the city mafia, Francesco Benvenuto. On May 8, he was quietly assassinated while sitting in his car in the driveway of his house. A close associate of the Morans would soon be found dead a week later. However, on June 15th, Melbourne would wake up to breaking news. Mark Moran was murdered. Mark was on 24-hour police surveillance, but suspiciously the cameras were switched off just hours before he was shot.
Nah, what? They getting niggas. Yo, they knocking people out in the jails? No, this is scary. Because for him to be on 24-hour police watch and out of nowhere the cameras turn off, yo, that's scary, man. Thoughts and prayers, bro.
Dead. According to police reports, he was found dead next to his white Holden. It seems the killers got him just as he was exiting his car. Several names were thrown around as the authorities tried to determine the perpetrators. Some thought the assassination was retribution for Francesco Benvenuto's murder. Most were convinced that even though they didn't know for sure why he was murdered, it definitely had something to do with the Melbourne power struggle. 2002 was a bloody year for Melbourne. There were 4 shootings, with 3 proving fatal. Among these included the murder of Paul Kalopalitis, the leader of the Sunshine Crew. Police found him sleeping in his bed with a bullet wound to the head. Andrew Venyamin was publicly suspected of having pulled the trigger. Not only was he said to be Australia's busiest assassin due to him having many contacts, but he was also a Sunshine Crew member and close associate of Carl Williams. On December 28, 2002, at around 8:30 a.m., police surveillance on Mark Anthony Smith showed he had just dropped off his daughter at work when a gunman pulled up on him. He was shot in the neck and hand. Quickly recognizing the shooter as Victor Brincat, he covered his neck wound with his hand, sprinting after him for revenge. He only stopped.
What? Why he just got popped? Yo, nah, lads. These are some real OGs. They make the younger crowd look a little soft.
When he realized he had lost too much blood and turned to wait for medical assistance. Mark survived the incident and relocated his family before returning to Melbourne to face his past. Now, just because Victor ran doesn't mean he was a small fish. Nicknamed the Runner, he was among the many experienced hitmen on Carl Williams' payroll. Brincat was suspected of pulling the trigger in at least 7 of all Melbourne's gangland killings.
Yo, I am just like taking this all in. This is so scary.
In 2003, yet another underworld leader died, allegedly in a betrayal during an inside job. On April 15th, Nick Radev, leader of the Radev gang and enforcer of the Melbourne head of Russian mafia, was shot in the head and chest 7 times. Just days before the hit, Radev was warned by the authorities that someone was after his head. However, he adamantly refused the tip, claiming that his friends would never betray him. Interestingly, 2 of his friends were with him and unharmed on the day of his assassination. The police even named them persons of interest. So far, every attempt to stop these tit-for-tat shootings had proved futile. There had been 20 murders with no convictions. The authorities knew that if no strict measures were implemented, criminals would get more confident, and Melbourne would be plunged into chaos. So in June 2003, Task Force Piranha was set up to put an end, or at least a leash, on Melbourne's underworld. That said, not many people had much faith in it. For one, it was massively short-staffed. Two, Melbourne's code of silence was difficult to crack. With gangsters dropping like flies, mafiosos knew it was relatively easy to find themselves on the other end of an assassin's barrel if they talked. Only a month after Task Force Piranha's formation, the public witnessed the broad daylight assassination of Jason Moran and associate Pasquale Barbaro. The two were mercilessly taken out as they sat in a van outside an Auskick football clinic. According to witnesses, the gunman Victor Brincat pulled up to their window and fired rounds into
not Victor again.
them. Not only did this happen in broad daylight as parents took their children to watch and play football games, but Jason and Pasquale were murdered right before their kids occupying the back seats, all of them aged 7 and under. Brincat then ran across the football oval, over a footbridge, and into a waiting getaway vehicle. Again, on the 21st of the following month, someone assassinated Willie Thompson, a close associate of the Moran family. Despite his reported profession as a lollipop vendor, Thompson owned a luxury house and vehicle. Criminal informants tipped the police that Carl Williams was behind the hit. They were convinced he did it to steal a large number of drug chemicals from him.
They snitching.
Barely a month later, on August 18th, the authorities were alerted about a fire in a storm drain. Upon arrival, officers were horrified to find the burnt body of Mark Malia inside a green wheelie bin. Police reports later established that Malia was kidnapped and torched by drug boss Carl Williams and his team of 7. They intended to get him to confess where he buried some laundered money. The following month was highlighted by the murder of Istvan Gulyas and his de facto wife. The two ran a dating agency, Partner Search Australia, that the police suspected was a front for a brothel ring. Istvan was a close associate of the slain Radev. On November 17th, Carl found himself on the wrong side of the law after the police intercepted a phone call in which he and Victor Brincat threatened to murder a Piranha Task Force detective and his girlfriend. Fortunately for him, he was bailed out 2 weeks later. 2 weeks after Carl's release, 61-year-old Kinnebra was ambushed and killed in front of his family members. Witnesses revealed that
I'm starting to think they safer in jail.
he had a gun on him and managed to return one shot before taking his last breath. This is the same Kinnebra that was implicated with Moran in the Alphonse Gangitano assassination 5 years back. In February 2004, bathing in all the attention, Carl Williams held a press conference with a news media outlet. In it, he denied allegations that he paid Andrew Venyamin 100,000 Australian dollars for 5 of Melbourne's murders. Barely a month later, on March 23rd, 2 of his close associates, Andrew Venyamin and Mick Gatto, would make headlines. The two had an altercation in the Carlton pizza restaurant La Parcella. They were enjoying lunch at the back when an argument arose. Apparently, Mick didn't want Venyamin close to any of his friends. Offended, Venyamin pulled out his gun and threatened to kill him. According to his testimony, Mick quickly reacted in self-defense, turning the gun on his associate and taking him out. Not many mourned the passing of Australia's busiest
That's why they say, man, if you gonna pull that out, you might as well use it, man. You can't be doing all that thinking and talking.
assassin. In an interview, drug kingpin Tony Mockbell said that even though Venyamin was a good bloke, many in Melbourne's underworld were relieved after his death. He was just too unpredictable, and nobody ever knew for sure which side he was on. On the other hand, the wife of Carl Williams, Roberta Williams, later said the news heavily saddened her. Although Roberta had previously denied allegations of having an affair with him behind Carl's back, she later stated in 2009 that Venyamin was her soulmate and she loved him deeply. 8 days after the restaurant incident, Louis Moran, father of the deceased Moran brothers, was assassinated in broad daylight. Recently released from prison, the police tried to warn him that his life was in danger, but he didn't listen and was fatally shot by 2 balaclava-clad men outside a Brunswick club. 2 more murders
lads, this is insane.
followed, including the assassination of Carl's close associate, Louis Kane, on May 8, 2004. The next was actually a double murder of Terence Hodson and his wife Christine. Terence was a police informant providing valuable insight into the Gangland War before his
Are there no rules, regulations, morals
untimely death at the hands of hitman Rodney Collins. Another one of Carl's hitmen, Rodney was a legitimate nightmare that seemed to enjoy killing. In fact, he willingly killed Christine without her being part of the contract. Later investigations strongly implicated a police drug detective who paid Carl Williams 100,000 Australian dollars for the hit. 3 weeks later, on June 9th, Purana Task Force detectives narrowly prevented an assassination attempt on Mario Condello. His assassins were intercepted minutes before arriving at Condello's house. Carl was subsequently arrested for conspiracy to murder. Following the arrest, Carl and Victor Brincat were charged on September 17th of the same year with the murder of Jason Moran and Pasquale Barbaros. Most criminals would be terrified that their career as a gangster was about to be over, not Carl Williams. He took this opportunity to enjoy what he craved the most: media attention. Known for his post-trial interviews, Carl considered himself the key character in Melbourne's scene. He even called himself the Premier and claimed to run the state.
Oh, I gotta watch some of these interviews, yo.
Even Peter Ferris, Carl's lawyer at the time, couldn't approve of such flamboyant behavior, as it made his work much harder. There was even a time when a terrified man ran up to him, desperately asking why his client, Carl, was trying to kill him. It wasn't much later that Ferris heard the man was shot dead. Nevertheless, despite his media persona, Ferris explained that Carl knew the game would soon be over for him. Even as they met in restaurants to discuss legal issues, Carl was always uneasy, demanding all phones be turned off. Everyone had to sit with their backs facing a wall in case somebody showed up guns blazing. He never even ate at the same restaurant twice, fearing each could be his last meal. The jury served Carl his first long-term sentence on October 29, 2004. However, it wasn't related to the Melbourne Gangland killings. Instead, he got 7 years behind bars for drug trafficking. The first people to be convicted of charges directly related to the Gangland War were gunmen Keith Fowry and Evangelos Goussis. Security footage of Louis Moran's assassination showed one of the gunmen with a tattoo identical to Evangelos's. Half a year later, in May 2005, more trouble would follow Carl after an unnamed former employee agreed to testify against him. The employee explained that he was Carl's driver on the day Mark Moran was fatally shot. He specifically added that he drove him to the
I hate rats, man. I do, because it's like if we agree to do something and you just go yapping your mouth, man, that shit trash.
location near Mark's house at the time of the murder. Carl now faced multiple charges related to the murders of Mark Milia, Jason Mark, and Louis Moran, together with the conspiracy to murder Mario Condello. After a series of long, high-security court appearances, followed by his usual media performances, his verdict was scheduled for May 7, 2007. Nobody would have anticipated Carl's curtain-closing performance. In the article Crunch Time by John Sylvester, he described Carl Williams as a man who spent years successfully avoiding an assassin's bullet, only to commit legal suicide with a series of bizarre courtroom acts. Not only did he turn his back on a sweet deal that would have at least reduced his sentences, but he also ignored his lawyer's advice to stop talking and even a little bit pretend to be sorry for his actions. During his Victoria Supreme Court hearing, Carl Williams confidently sat behind bulletproof glass flanked by 7 security guards. All through, he laughed and didn't show a trace of remorse. Perhaps accustomed to a sense of security offered by a gang of soldiers bought with a combination of drugs, money, power, and women, Carl pleaded guilty to all charges. And after receiving his 4 sentences, double life imprisonment for the murders of Jason Moran and Mark Malia, 25 years for the murder of Louis Moran, and another 25 years for conspiring to murder Mario Condello, he smiled and addressed the judge, saying, "I have something to say. I expect nothing better of you. You are not a judge. You are only a puppet of the police. You are a puppet for Purana." This was followed by an, fuck off. Carl
Nah, he wildin'.
was escorted to Barwon Maximum Security Prison, where he was expected to spend most of his remaining life. Finally, after 3 long years of hard work, 6,000 hours of recordings, and 22,000 hours of suspect surveillance, Task Force Purana had successfully halted the Melbourne Gangland killings. It was a great win for Australia's police force in what was initially considered an impossible feat. At least now, the murders would stop, or so they thought. 2 years later, another Moran made headlines on June 15, 2009. This time, it was Desmond Moran, uncle to the Moran brothers. He was shot dead at Ascot Vale in Melbourne's northwest. However, this time, it wasn't Carl Williams who was responsible. The following day after the murder, the mother of the Moran brothers, Judy Moran, was arrested and charged with the murder. Interestingly enough, her house mysteriously caught fire while she was in custody. According
Yo, what? Not the mama a gangster too?
to police reports, she had an alibi that she was visiting her son's graves at the time of the murder. However, this was proven to be false. It turns out she and Desmond Moran had a dispute over the money remaining after the murder of the 3 Moran leaders. As a result, she will be eligible for parole in 2032 at the age of 88. Finally, in April 2010, it turned out that the 37th and final murder of Melbourne's Gangland killings was to be Carl Williams himself. He didn't go easy. Prison authorities reported that the former drug lord had his head bashed in with an exercise bike handle by fellow inmate Matthew Johnson. At the time, most people thought his death was probably due to a prison dispute. Nonetheless, some believed there was more to it. If the Melbourne Gangland War was complex enough to include the elite, others thought it wouldn't be in the scope of reality if they wanted to tie off some loose ends. Roberta Williams, Carl's former wife, is among those who think the murder was meticulously planned. She mainly questioned how Carl Williams' body laid undiscovered for 42 minutes after the murder. Roberta claimed that for a high-profile inmate in the highest maximum security prison in the state, 42 minutes was an awfully long time for prison officers not to notice something wrong, especially when there are 24/7 CCTV cameras on every turn. It turned out there was something to her claims. You see, not only was Carl's murder caught on film, but during his killer's trial in 2011, Carl had agreed with the then assistant commissioner to become an informant. The authorities believed he knew crucial information related to a few unsolved murders featuring some corrupt police officers. This was further solidified by a previous article by the Herald Sun revealing that the Victoria Police were paying 8,000 Australian dollars in school fees for Williams' daughter, Dakota Williams. Suddenly, everything seemed to make sense, pushing the Victorian Ombudsman to investigate the circumstances leading to his death. Soon after, a report critical of Correction Victoria, approving Williams sharing a cell with Johnson,
Yo, this is so interesting, lads.
was released in April 2012. A few weeks later, 2 high office government executives resigned from office. 7 years later, in 2019, the former Department Commissioner for Victorian Police, Sir Kenneth Lloyd, made a written submission stating his belief that prison staff was involved in the death of Carl Williams. As always, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed
W video, yo. W information.